Welcome back, Econ friends, for another lecture. In our last two lectures, we were looking at the ideas of economic efficiency, and we built up a way of thinking, sort of a model that showed that if left alone and under conditions of, competition, easy entry exit with secured property rights, a competitive market, which follows the self-interest of all the buyers and sellers within it, a competitive market can actually lead to outcomes that are socially beneficial. So we discussed that, and then we went into a little bit about the invisible hand and the importance of the price system in making this happen. The conclusions were pretty important. In this lecture, we're going to see what happens, or what can potentially happen, when instead of prices being determined by markets through the market mechanism of supply and demand, we're going to see what happens when government inserts itself into the economy and government attempts to set or restrict or control prices. We're going to see that that has some pretty nasty outcomes, and it's going to be up to you as informed citizens to be thinking about this anytime you see proposed price controls. Okay? So again, we're getting out of market setting prices through supply and demand and into a discussion of price controls, which occurs when the government sets prices. We're also going to talk a little bit at the end of this lecture about what are known as black markets. And these are the kind of illegal, underground, unauthorized markets that inevitably emerge whenever government tries to intervene in the economy. Okay? So let's talk about this briefly. First of all, by way of a definition, you should know that a price control is defined as a government mandated price. So price controls are defined as government mandated prices that are generally imposed in the form of either an artificially high or artificially low price, seen a different way, a maximum or minimum legal price. Again, the big idea here is that whenever government price controls are in effect, the market is blocked. The market is not allowed to perform its price forming function. And instead, prices are set by the government, okay, by non-market means, okay, by political means. And these price controls will almost always take the form of either maximum or minimum legal prices. Now, price controls, it's really important to point out, are oftentimes very politically popular. Remember, markets are efficient, but markets don't always guarantee that the people involved in them are happy. I mean, the law of demand suggests that buyers will always prefer prices to be lower. Even if there's a market price which performs an important function, buyers will always wish it was a little bit lower, and sellers, reflecting the law of supply, will always wish the price were a little bit higher. What happens is sometimes these groups which want different prices, which want non-market prices, they're going to organize and make political changes, influence government to change prices. So again, these price controls are often very politically popular. However, they prevent that very critical market-based invisible hand process. So again, while the controls are politically popular, they prevent what we learned last time as market-based invisible hand processes. And we observe that those processes are really powerful and often beneficial. Whenever we get a price control, that process is broken. Okay? One type of price control is a price ceiling. A price ceiling is defined as a legally established, meaning it's in the law books, it's passed by some sort of administrative or legislative body, it's a legally established maximum price that a seller can charge for a good or a service. The classic example in economic literature is a rent control. Really quickly, whenever we're talking about a price ceiling, we have our model here. We have demand and we have supply, and we would have our equilibrium. It's important to note that although intuitively you would think that a price ceiling would be set above the equilibrium price because the ceiling is above your head, in fact, a price ceiling, we'll call it here PC, is set below equilibrium price. Remember, a price ceiling is a maximum price. So when you think about floor or ceiling, don't think about location, think about function. Just as a ceiling prevents things from going above it, a price ceiling keeps prices artificially low, preventing them from adjusting naturally and breaking through the ceiling to get to equilibrium, okay? So just remember, whenever you're thinking about price floor or price ceiling, don't think about the location, think about the function. A price ceiling is a legally established maximum price. Prices cannot go above it. So what we call a binding ceiling would be set below equilibrium, and it would block prices at that ceiling level from getting to equilibrium, okay? So the classic example that we use is rent control. Now, one of the first things that you need to observe is because price ceilings push prices below market equilibrium, they're going to lead to a shortage. And critically, they're going to lead to a dead weight loss. So we're going to argue that a price ceiling, because it's technically defined as a legal maximum, which is oftentimes set below equilibrium, price is going to be artificially low, we'll say, right? The price is artificially low. And we know that low prices tell buyers, buy more, but low prices tell sellers, sell less. So there's going to be a bit of a disequilibrium here. It's going to lead to a shortage and inevitably to a dead weight loss. Let's take a quick look at a graph to figure it out. So here we have in panel A, note that we have price and note that we have quantity. So we have a very typical supply and demand graph. Okay, we have an upward sloping supply curve, nothing new. We have a downward sloping demand curve, nothing new. If left alone, the market would set an equilibrium price right here at equilibrium. And that equilibrium price would be, I don't know, right here, maybe, $20 or whatever. And we would also have an equilibrium quantity, okay? All of this you guys know, we've gone over it. What happens in the case of a price ceiling, so this is panel A, a price ceiling, the price is set down here. We'll call this PC. It's set at $15. It's set below equilibrium. Now again, don't be confused. I know you're thinking, but ceiling's above my head. Shouldn't the price ceiling be above equilibrium? No. Don't think about location, think about function. Prices want to get back to equilibrium. They want to rise, but because of this ceiling, they're blocked. So think about the function. A price ceiling holds prices below equilibrium and prevents them from doing what they naturally want to do, which is getting back to equilibrium. Okay? Well, you can see right away that there's a problem. Because the price is artificially low, there is going to be, take the price ceiling and match it up to the supply curve, there is going to be a quantity supplied that is below what the market would have produced at equilibrium. And as a result of that, as we learned last time, there's going to be a dead weight loss. You'll recall that a dead weight loss refers to the drop, the reduction in total surplus whenever a market is distorted. Whenever a market does not meet or hit its equilibrium output level. Again, if this market were at equilibrium would be here, we would drop a line down, we would have a quantity of 3. But instead, because the artificially low price sends a signal to sellers right where the price meets the supply curve, we're going to have this artificially low output of 2. Okay, so right away, we can see graphically that we're going to have a dead weight loss. If the market were at equilibrium, we would have had this really big total surplus, which would have been this big triangle here, which you know about now. Okay, so we say, yep, if we had hit equilibrium, the market would have had this big total surplus. But we're not going to hit the natural equilibrium. In fact, we're going to hit an artificially low output level because the artificially low price tells sellers sell less. And instead, we're going to have a total surplus that is only this big. So you can see that our total surplus is going to change. And what we're going to have then is a dead weight loss. This triangle right here is going to be our dead weight loss. And it's going to represent the loss in total surplus that this policy leads to. So right away, we have a bit of an issue. We've got this politically popular rule, this law that lowers some prices and allows some consumers to pay less. But at the society-wide level, as measured by total surplus, we've got an inefficiency, okay? And that's not a good thing. If you go over here to this panel, you can actually see the comparison of consumer surplus, producer surplus, dead weight loss, both with no ceiling at equilibrium and with a ceiling. And if you want to pause the video real quick and take a look, you can see that these different areas in the boxes represent different things. And that's a really good way to look at the before and after effects, the effect of a price control on consumer surplus, on producer surplus, and on total surplus. Okay, but either way, we know it's going to be inefficient. And of course, we also know that there's going to be, let me get rid of all of this here, that there's also going to be a bit of a disequilibrium. Because again, at this artificially low price, sellers are incentivized to sell less. But where this low price hits the demand curve, the law of demand tells us that at the low price, buyers want to buy more. So on top of the dead weight loss, this is going to generate a pretty decent shortage. Another sign of inefficiency. Okay, so right off the top, we can say that price ceilings are going to lead to some pretty nasty effects: a shortage, a lack of equilibrium, and a dead weight loss. We would also see that price ceilings, specifically the classic example of rent control, would lead to a few other very predictable and very negative consequences. Number one, we just said, you're going to have shortages. And wherever you have shortages, you're going to probably get the development of black markets, which we'll discuss shortly. Number two, we're going to probably see the future supply of rental property go down. We're going to see the future supply of rental housing go down. And this makes sense. Put yourself in the position of either actual landlord or a potential landlord. These ceilings are affecting your profitability. They're making some endeavors that might have been profitable at equilibrium now not profitable, not economical. So they're simply going to pull out and say, you know what, I'm no longer going to rent housing under these laws. Okay. The other thing that you might see is if a landlord has, for example, actual land and there are these rent controls in place, they may say, I still want to rent out property, but they'll build commercial property to rent out to businesses. and not residential property to rent out to people for housing. But either way, you know, we're trying to solve this problem around society of not enough housing. These laws actually exacerbate that problem because they are going to reduce, they're going to decline the future supply of housing. Number three, you can bet that the quality of existing rental housing will fall. If you're a landlord, you basically have two different things that you're looking at: the revenues that come in and the costs that go out. If your revenues coming in are going to be shortened, they're going to be declined or reduced because of these rules, a pretty logical way to react would be to cut back on your expenditures. So we would expect to see quality, safety, security, timely repairs on these apartment units fall dramatically. Because simply put, the landlords no longer have the same incentive to do those things. And once again, the people in those units, the people who are renting housing, the people who these rules were supposed to help are actually going to suffer. Number four, very sad thing, we're going to see some non-price methods of rationing become more important. Non-price methods of rationing will emerge, and they'll become much more important. Remember what we said before. Prices don't cause scarcity. Scarcity is a universal, okay? Just because you get rid of or tweak prices is not going to fix the scarcity problem. And in fact, you still, even without prices doing their job, you're still going to need a rationing function. Well, if price controls, rent controls don't allow market-based rental rates to ration things out, landlords still have to find other ways to ration it. And this can get really, really dodgy. A landlord can say, for example, that you need to pay an exorbitantly large deposit to get a unit. Well, once again, that's going to favor people who already have wealth and disfavor or hurt the relatively poor people who these policies are supposed to be assisting. But even then, we're still talking money. What if a landlord were to decide on a rationing method based on just pure blatant discrimination? He says or she says, I'm only going to rent to a particular type of person. We're always going to have a rationing device. If we take away the ability of prices to ration, non-price methods will emerge. And sadly, in society, those non-price methods can oftentimes involve blatant discrimination based on ethnicity, language, religion, sexual orientation, or anything else like that. Okay? It's sad to say, but these policies open the door for this type of discrimination. And finally, number five, we're going to probably see an inefficient use of housing space. And basically, this is just, again, saying that without the market mechanisms to instill discipline in landlords, we're going to see a lot of inefficiency arise. On the whole, what's really the paradox of these rent control rules is they're often passed in an effort, or at least in a stated effort, to help poorer people. Yet, these policies tend to hurt those people much more than they help them. Okay? So that's a price ceiling. Our second type of price control is known as a price floor. A price floor is defined as a legally established minimum price that buyers have to pay for a good or service, or a good or a resource. Okay? Now, let's do a quick little sketch. P, 0, and Q. We have our equilibrium price here. Note that even though intuitively you think the floor is down there below my feet, the price floor should be down there. No. Think again about function, not location. Price floors are located above equilibrium, or at least if they're a binding price floor, they're located above equilibrium. Much like the floor keeps things from falling through, the price floor keeps prices that are too high from falling back down to equilibrium, okay? So again, think function, not location. Price floors located, if they're a binding price floor, above equilibrium, all right? Let's do a quick summary of this. So again, minimum price that a buyer has to pay for a good or a resource or a service. The classic example in economics is a minimum wage law. Now, in case you're thinking, how does a minimum wage law tie into a price control? Well, remember, at the end of it all, a wage is simply a price. Specifically, a wage is the price of labor. So when we talk about a minimum wage law, we're talking about a price control because wages are prices of labor. And a minimum wage law is an attempt by government to basically dictate a minimum price at which a potential worker and a potential boss are allowed to engage in trade. Okay. Obviously, we can predict that while these things may be well-intentioned, that they may be intended to help probably lower skilled workers, they're going to have some effects. What are those effects? Well, number one, because the price floors, and you can see one right here, a price floor, notice that we would have, again, typical supply and demand graph, right? P and Q are here, upward supply curve, downward demand curve. We have an equilibrium price, which would be here. And we would call that price actually the wage, right? You know, here it looks like it'd be around, I don't know, $20, whatever. What happens when you have a price control in the form of a minimum wage is it's going to set it above equilibrium. A price floor is saying, nope, I don't care that the equilibrium price is 20, you have to charge or you have to pay 25, and we're not going to allow the prices to go below it, okay? So that's how that works out. Let's take a quick look at the impact of it. You can guess, because the price is artificially high and high prices send two distinct signals. High prices tell sellers, offer more for sale, but high prices tell buyers, don't buy as much. They're going to lead to surpluses. And of course, they're going to lead to a dead weight loss. Once again, this legislation, this law, this dictate that is at least sold to us as a way to help people is going to cause some issues, okay? Again, at the artificially high price, you see that QS is really high. And at the artificially high price, you see that QD is really low. So of course, when QS exceeds QD, we're going to have a surplus. By the way, in case you haven't quite figured it out, in a labor market, a surplus of labor is a nice way of saying unemployment. And because we know that we're not going to be operating at equilibrium because we're going to have an artificially low amount of trades taking place, we also know that we're going to have a dead weight loss, okay? Seen a different way, we know that if we were allowed to operate at the market equilibrium, as you know, we would have this very nice, big, fully sized triangle, which maximizes total surplus. Great success. However, in the presence of a price control, whether it's artificially high or artificially low, we're going to have less than optimal numbers of trades take place, and therefore we're going to see a dead weight loss. Note again from our last lecture that dead weight losses are bordered by the supply curve on the bottom, by the demand curve on the top, and by the artificially low amount of trades, the artificially low quantity on the left. And that triangle there is our dead weight loss. Okay. You can also take a look, and I would recommend, if you want to pause the video, that you look right here at panel B, which gives you a really deep dive into consumer surplus, producer surplus, and total surplus with and without this control. Okay. But we'll wrap up with this. Minimum wage laws especially are very politically hot button. However, from the lens of economics, while they might be politically popular, we know in economics that, like any price control, minimum wage laws are going to have some predictable secondary effects. And it's really important that you know this. Minimum wage laws don't affect many people in the population. Older workers, educated workers, high earners, it doesn't bother them. It doesn't affect them. The minimum wage laws are what we call a non-binding constraint. If you have a great job, you have a degree, you have experience, you have a great job, you have high skills, and you're making 80, 90, 100, 500,000 a year, these laws mean nothing. They don't affect you at all. But these minimum wage laws have a major impact on two groups: younger workers and low-skilled workers. Those are the people that these minimum wage laws are supposed to be helping. Unfortunately, these predictable secondary effects, which are generally negative, hurt those younger and less skilled workers. What are a couple? Well, let's go through 4. Number 1, employers will just substitute. Specifically, if you're a boss and you see, wow, my labor costs are going up because of this minimum wage law, labor is going to look relatively less attractive to you than machines or robots or other types of capital goods will. So oftentimes, we see employers substitute machines for workers. Very rational move for a boss. Well, that minimum wage law just raised the price of those workers. Now they're a lot more expensive. Now this machine looks a lot more attractive. I'm going to let them go. I'm going to bring the machine in. Nobody is helped when they lose their job. Okay. Number 2, we're going to reduce, predictably, we're going to reduce employment levels. That's the surplus part. We're going to reduce employment levels. Seen a different way, we're going to expect unemployment rates, especially for the young and the low-skilled workers, to go up. Number 3, bosses who say, well, I have to pay these workers more money now, they're going to probably trim away other parts of the job. So when you get your first jobs, you're going to have a salary, but there's other components of your job. Your boss might offer you insurance coverage or retirement plans or, health coverage, vacation days, maybe training, all these other non-salary components of your job. Well, if a boss is forced by a minimum wage law to pay more salary, to pay more wage, they're going to probably cut back on those other things. So we would expect, for example, to see fewer training opportunities. A boss might say, if I have to spend all this money to pay my workers, I don't have the money left over that I want to train them. So they cut back on the training. And in a different way, we're going to see a decline in what we call non-wage benefits. You can imagine a lot of different types of non-wage benefits. Flexibility in scheduling. Maybe you're a single parent, you have kids, you have to take the kids to school, to a practice, you have to go to a back to school night. Some bosses would say, hey, I understand where you're coming from. I'm not going to pay you as much as I can, but I'm going to give you a lot of flexibility. And maybe you're willing to trade a slightly lower salary for a bit more flexibility. Well, These minimum wage laws, in addition to providing fewer training opportunities, will also reduce those non-wage benefits that a lot of younger and low-skilled workers look for. Flexibility, the chance to grow, the chance for tuition reimbursements, all these different things, okay? At the end of it, this is a really dangerous thing. And it's dangerous for one or many reasons, but one real big social reason. For a lot of people, their entry into their first job, for most people, their first entry into the career path, their first job, it pays very little. But those jobs are critical. They teach you basic work habits. They teach you how to get to work on time. They teach you how to handle conflict resolution in a workplace. You grow skills and confidence. You make a little money. Once you have some money, you say, hey, I need to learn how to use my checking account and save and budget. So there's a lot of life skills that generate for many workers based on these entry level, not sexy, not glamorous, grunt type of jobs. But they're important. They're important for a worker's growth path. When we have these minimum wage laws, we really take away the ability of many workers, again, especially younger and less skilled ones, to enter the workforce and learn those skills. And that right there is a major social cost, okay? Finally, let's talk a little bit about black markets. While a black market is not so much a price control, black markets often emerge anytime markets or market prices are controlled or hampered. Or in extreme cases, black markets will emerge anytime the market for a particular good is made illegal. Okay? So a black market is a functioning market. It's just operating sort of under the radar because it's operating outside of the law, either by bypassing price controls or by oftentimes offering, selling, having a market for products, drugs, prostitution, all these different things that legal codes prohibit. Okay, so again, black markets, they're not price controls, but they typically emerge in response to those controls. Let's analyze them really quickly. By definition, a black market is a market that operates outside the legal system. And in that, we're either going to see illegal goods being sold, or we're going to see legal goods sold at illegal prices. Okay? So we're either going to take goods that are illegal and see them sold in the black market, or we're going to see legal goods being bought and sold, but at illegal prices. Okay? Supply and demand, as in any market, they determine prices in black markets, but because those markets operate outside the legal structure, we have some predictable effects, okay? This implies that black markets, number one, entail a greater risk for the participants. You can imagine a drug market, right? An illegal drug market. The buying and selling of illegal drugs is extremely risky for the buyers and sellers who participate in that market, okay? So again, it's critical. Supply and demand still rule when it comes to black markets. But because those markets exist outside of legal channels, the supply and demand take on different meanings, and there's some implications. Implication number one, black markets will entail greater risk. Number two, we would expect uncertain product quality. If you are not selling something in a legal capacity, it's not like the customer, if they don't like it, can return it. It's not like if it makes the customer sick, they can go to the FDA or another legal body and sue you. The good's illegal. It operates outside the legal framework. So on top of being risky for participants, we would predict much lower product quality, or if not lower, uncertain, especially the case with, for example, drug markets. We would see very informal enforcement of contracts. We've discussed the fact that contracts are an essential feature of a functioning market. Contracts are critical for markets, and contracts do their job because contracts can be enforced in courts of law. You feel safe entering into a legal transaction that's contract protected because if the opposing party violates the contract, you can sue. You have legal recourse. It's not the case here. So we're going to see informal enforcements of contracts, which is basically, my friends, in black markets, this informal enforcement is almost always violence as a means of contract enforcement. So we're going to see greater risk to the people involved. We're going to see some dodgy product quality. We're going to see an informal enforcement of contracts, probably through violence. And we're going to see a lack of legal channels, a lack of a functioning court system to settle disputes, which once again will reinforce the violence in the black market. Okay, when you take all these things into account, and when you compare a black market with a normal market, economic analysis is going to predict several outcomes. We're going to predict that black markets will be characterized by, number one, higher incidence, higher levels, right? A higher incidence of defective products. If you're lucky in a black market, that will be like a defective iPad or a defective phone that doesn't work. Much more concerning are in, for example, drug markets or markets for illegal prescriptions in which that product you're ingesting can kill you. Okay, so we're going to see higher incidence of defective products. We're going to see higher prices. That's ironic, but we're going to see higher prices because we have to account for risk. Because these black markets are riskier, especially for the sellers who, if caught, will go to jail, black markets typically lead to higher prices. We're going to see higher profit rates. Because of the higher prices, we're going to see higher rates of profitability. However, let's be very clear, higher rates of profits, and again, the pi sign, right? The symbol pi is profit. Profit is equal to your total revenue minus your total cost. Don't forget that, okay? We're going to see in black markets higher profit rates, at least for those who don't get caught. And finally, because of the lack of legal channels to enforce disputes, because of an unenforceable contract mechanism, and again, because of these higher profits, we're going to predict that black markets will be characterized by much, much more violence. Okay? At the end, black markets highlight a couple of things. Number one, black markets highlight the power of self-interested actions and competitive market forces. Okay, black markets highlight the power of self-interested actions and competitive market forces. They also highlight the importance of a legal system that is fair, impartial, and accessible, for a legal system that provides for the protection of property rights, that allows for contract enforcement, and that allows for some sort of fair, unbiased, and impartial mechanisms for settling disputes, okay? When you look at black markets, compare them to normal markets, again, it highlights, by looking at a black market and seeing what they don't have and the problems that show up, it puts it in contrast and really reinforces what makes competitive markets work well. We discussed it last time with the invisible hand. We conclude now by saying that competitive self-interested markets with rational actions in a series of competitive markets with easy entry exit, but critically with a legal system that protects private property rights, that enforces contracts, and that offers market players a fair, impartial, unbiased system is critical for a market economy to work. In other words, as we said way back in our opening lectures on Thinking Like an Economist, these are some of the institutions that make markets work. Okay? With that, my friends, we're done with the lecture. However, I do have a couple of practice questions. Here they are. Simple example, a little bit of math for you. Here it goes. Suppose that demand is characterized by the demand function P equals 200 minus 2Q, and supply can be summarized by the equation P equals 20 plus Q. I know we haven't done this before, but we can take supply and demand functions and put them into simple formulas. So the demand function, P is 200 minus 2Q, and the supply function, P is 20 plus Q. I would like you to use your basic math skills to, number one, find the equilibrium price, the equilibrium quantity, the consumer surplus, the producer surplus, and the total surplus in this market. Number two, I want you to determine if there's any effect of a $60 price floor. And number three, I want you to think about a $100 price floor and consider the effects of that, specifically by calculating the deadweight loss. I know it's a challenge, I know it's something new, but take those formulas, take some basic algebra skill, and take the stuff that we've learned our last couple lectures and see if you can solve it. I'll end right here, and in my next video, I'll offer solutions. Good luck, give it a shot, and I'll talk to you soon.